Captain Jake Harrison stood in the center of the massive council chamber, his hands clasped behind his back. The room stretched out before him like a giant dome, filled with thousands of alien delegates from across the galaxy. Some floated in, special tanks filled with strange gases. Others perched on crystal platforms that hummed with energy. A few looked almost human, but most were so different that Jake had to focus to avoid staring. The air smelled of ozone and something sweet that made his nose itch. Strange music played softly from hidden speakers, meant to calm the different species present. But Jake felt anything but calm. His heart pounded in his chest as he waited for the vote that would change everything. 300 years ago, humans had first made contact with the galaxy. Back then, Earth was excited to join this vast community of intelligent life. Humans had dreams of sharing knowledge, exploring new worlds, and building friendships that would last forever. They offered their best and brightest to help solve galactic problems, and solve problems they did. When the Kepler plague threatened to wipe out 12 species, human doctors found the cure in just 6 months. When the trade wars between the Outer Rim worlds nearly caused economic collapse, human negotiators created peace agreements that lasted decades. When the ancient AI networks started failing, human engineers fixed systems that alien civilizations had given up on. But respect never came with success. The more humans helped, the more the galaxy expected from them. Other species took credit for human discoveries. They demanded human soldiers fight their wars while calling them primitive warmongers. They stole human technology and then complained that humans were not sharing enough. Jake had watched it happen for his entire career. He had served on 17 different worlds, always as Earth's representative, always cleaning up messes that others had made. He had seen human scientists work day and night to save alien populations, only to be told they were too aggressive to be trusted with important decisions. Today was supposed to be different. Today was supposed to be the day when Earth finally got a real voice in galactic affairs. Instead, it had become something much worse. Dr. Lisa Chen sat in the human delegation area behind Jake, her face pale with anger. She had spent the last 5 years developing a cure for the Zephyrian blood rot, a disease that was killing millions. Her research had saved entire worlds, but this morning, the Galactic Health Council had announced that the cure had been discovered by Dr. Zex of the Hegemony. Lisa's name was not mentioned anywhere in the official records. Ambassador Paul Wright was there too, looking older than his 50 years. Paul had negotiated peace between warring species more times than anyone could count. He spoke 7 alien languages fluently and understood the complex politics of the galaxy better than most aliens. But when he tried to speak during today's session, Counselor Vex had told him to wait until the real diplomats were finished talking. The voting had started 3 hours ago. The issue was simple. Should Earth be given full voting rights in the HFY Galactic Council, or should humans continue to serve in their current role as helpers and problem solvers without any real power? Jake had given his speech earlier. He had talked about 3 centuries of human service to the galaxy. He had listed the wars prevented, diseases cured, and disasters avoided because of human intervention. He had shown statistics proving that humans had contributed more to galactic civilization than most species that had full voting rights. The response had been polite applause and knowing looks between alien delegates. They had heard it all before. To them, humans were useful tools, nothing more. Then came the real shock. Counselor Vex of the Dominion had stood up with a proposal that made Jake's blood run cold. The Zephyrian Empire was demanding that Earth hand over its 50 most brilliant scientists to work on military projects. These scientists would become property of the Empire, never allowed to return to Earth or communicate with their families. Humans have proven they cannot be trusted with advanced research, Vex had said, his multiple eyes gleaming in the chamber's light. Their aggressive nature makes them dangerous, but their minds are useful. We propose that Earth surrender these individuals for the greater good of galactic security. The chamber had erupted in discussion. Some species objected, but not many. Most seemed to think it was a reasonable request. After all, what was 50 human lives compared to the safety of the galaxy? Jake had asked to respond, but his request was denied. The vote would proceed without further human input. Now he watched as the results came in. The massive display above the chamber showed the tally in real time. Species after species voted in favor of the Zephyrian proposal. The few votes against came from small, powerless worlds that knew they might be next. The final count appeared. 847 in favor, 3 against. Jake felt something break inside his chest. Not his heart, but something deeper. His faith in galactic civilization. Maybe. His belief that cooperation and goodwill could overcome prejudice and fear. He looked back at Lisa and Paul. Lisa was crying quietly, tears running down her cheeks. Paul just looked tired, like a man who had fought a long battle and finally accepted defeat. The chamber was buzzing with conversation now. Many delegates were already leaving, treating this as just another routine vote. The decision to enslave 50 human beings was so normal to them that they were discussing dinner plans. Counselor Vex approached the human delegation area, his expression smug. "Captain Harrison, we will need the list of scientists within 1 standard week. We suggest you choose individuals who will adapt well to their new circumstances." Jake stood up slowly. The entire chamber seemed to quiet down, as if sensing that something important was about to happen. Even the background music stopped. "Counselor Vex," Jake said, his voice carrying clearly across the vast space. "I have a message from Earth's government." Vex's expression shifted slightly. He had expected pleading or negotiation, not a formal message. Jake reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device. He pressed a button, and his voice was amplified throughout the chamber. Every delegate, no matter how far away, could hear him clearly. "Earth hereby withdraws from all galactic treaties, trade agreements, and cooperative ventures. We are recalling all human personnel, technology, and resources from every world, station, and facility in the galaxy. Effective immediately, humanity severs all ties with galactic civilization." The chamber exploded into chaos. Thousands of voices rose at once, some shouting in languages Jake did not recognize. Several delegates fell from their platforms in shock. The display screens flickered and went dark as the station's systems struggled to process the sudden storm of communication. Jake continued speaking over the noise. "All human citizens have 72 hours to report to designated evacuation. Points. All human-designed technology will be deactivated or removed. All ongoing human research projects are terminated immediately." Counselor Vex was pushing through the crowd, trying to reach Jake. His multiple arms were waving frantically. "You cannot be serious. This is impossible. The galaxy needs human involvement." Jake looked at him with eyes that had gone completely cold. The galaxy just voted that it does not need human opinions, human rights, or human dignity. "We are simply giving you what you asked for." Paul Wright stood up beside Jake, his diplomatic training taking over. "For 3 centuries we offered partnership. You chose exploitation. We offered our best minds. You chose to steal their work. We offered peace. You chose to treat us as inferiors." Lisa Chen wiped her tears and joined them. "You want our scientists, you want our research, you want our solutions to your problems? Then you should have treated us as equals instead of slaves." The 3 humans turned and walked toward the chamber exit. Behind them, the chaos was getting worse. Delegates were screaming at each other in a dozen languages. Some were trying to call their homeworlds to report what had happened. Others were demanding that security stop the humans from leaving. But no one moved to physically block their path. For all their talk of human aggression, none of the aliens wanted to be the first to actually attack Earth's representatives. As they reached the door, Jake turned back one final time. The chamber had gone quiet again. Thousands of alien eyes focused on him. "Good luck," he said simply. Then the 3 humans walked out, leaving the galaxy to face its future alone. 6 months had passed since the vote at the Galactic Council, and the galaxy was beginning to understand that Earth had not been bluffing. What started as quiet whispers in government halls had become panicked emergency sessions as the true scale of human withdrawal became clear. Admiral Lisa Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the Earthship Defiance, watching the evacuation of mining station Kepler 442 through the main view screen. The massive asteroid facility had been home to 12,000 workers from 17 different species, but only 800 of them were human. Those 800, however, had designed and built everything that made the station work. Status. Report, Lisa called to her communications officer. All human personnel are aboard the transport ships, Admiral. Engineering teams are finishing the final shutdown sequences now. Lisa nodded. This was the 47th evacuation she had overseen in the past 6 months. Each one followed the same pattern. The local authorities would panic when they realized the humans were actually leaving. They would offer bribes, threaten legal action, and sometimes even try to physically prevent the departure. It never worked. Down on the station, Bobby Turner was supervising the dismantling of the main reactor core. Bobby had worked on Kepler 442 for 15 years, rising from a junior technician to the head of engineering. He knew every pipe, every circuit, and every safety system in the entire facility. Careful with that coupling, Bobby told his team as they removed a critical component. We don't want to leave them with a radiation leak. The alien supervisors stood nearby, watching with growing alarm. Station Commander Zek, a tall creature with blue skin and 4 arms, kept asking the same questions over and over. But how do we maintain the thermal regulators? What about the gravity generators? Who will calibrate the mining lasers? Bobby looked at him with tired eyes. You should have thought about that before you voted to make us slaves. The truth was that the aliens had never bothered to learn how their own stations worked. They assumed that humans would always be there to fix things when they broke. Human engineers had written all the manuals in human languages. Human technicians had trained only other humans. When problems arose, alien supervisors simply called for human help. Now the humans were gone, and the aliens were left with incredibly complex machinery they did not understand. Please, Commander Zek begged. We can pay you. We can give you better working conditions. We can make you supervisors instead of workers. Bobby sealed the last component into its transport container. 6 months ago, that might have worked, but you had your chance to treat us fairly. You chose not to. Similar scenes were playing out across the galaxy. On the agricultural world of Centauri Gardens, Dr. Amy Foster was packing up her medical supplies and research equipment. The planet was in the middle of a plague outbreak, and Amy's innovative treatment protocols were the only thing keeping it under control. Amy had arrived on Centauri Gardens 3 years ago when the plague first appeared. The local doctors had no idea how to fight it. The disease attacked the nervous system in ways they had never seen before. Traditional treatments made it worse. Patients were dying by the thousands. Amy had worked 18-hour days for months, studying the plague and testing different approaches. She had finally developed a treatment that stopped the disease and even reversed some of its effects. The death rate had dropped from 60% to less than 5%. But when the Galactic Health Council published their report on the plague, Amy's name was nowhere to be found. The credit went to Dr. Vorth of the Hegemony, who had contributed nothing to the research. Amy's protests were ignored. She was told that humans were too emotional to be trusted with important medical decisions. Now Amy was leaving, and she was taking her knowledge with her. Dr. Foster, you cannot abandon these patients, pleaded Dr. Kelm, the head of the Planetary Medical Center. Without your treatment protocols, the plague will spread again. Amy continued packing her equipment. I gave you 3 years of my life to save your people. When I asked for recognition, you gave it to someone else. When I asked for respect, you called me emotional. I am not abandoning anyone. I am simply no longer volunteering to help people who see me as a tool instead of a person. Dr. Kelm watched in horror as Amy sealed her research notes in a secure container. At least leave us the treatment formulas. People will die without them. Amy paused at the door. People were dying before I came here too. Somehow that was acceptable to you then. Meanwhile, in the Kepler sector, engineer Rick Davis was overseeing the shutdown of the hyperspace relay network. The network was a miracle of human engineering, allowing instant communication across hundreds of light years. It had taken 20 years to build and required constant maintenance to keep running. Rick had been the chief engineer on the project since the beginning. He knew every relay station, every power coupling, and every quantum field generator in the system. More importantly, he was the only person who understood how all the pieces worked together. The relay stations were controlled from a central facility on the moon of Kepler-7. Rick stood in the main control room, watching as his team systematically shut down each node in the network. With every shutdown, another section of the galaxy lost its ability to communicate with the outside universe. Node 47 is offline, reported his assistant, Carl Jackson. Node 48 is offline. Node 49 is offline. Each announcement was followed by frantic calls from planetary governments, trade organizations, and military commands. They were all asking the same question: when would the network be restored? Rick answered every call with the same message: the network is being permanently shut down. Earth is withdrawing all support for galactic communication systems. The alien officials could not believe it. The hyperspace relay network was essential to galactic civilization. Without it, trade between distant worlds would become impossible. Military forces would lose coordination. Scientific research would slow to a crawl. Families separated by light years would lose contact with each other. But Rick was not concerned with galactic problems anymore. He was only concerned with getting his people home safely. Node 50 is offline. That completes the Kepler sector shutdown, sir. Good work, Carl. Start the evacuation procedures. We leave in 6 hours. In the Outer Rim territories, Captain Susan Lee commanded a fleet of transport ships carrying human civilians back to Earth space. The evacuation was the largest in galactic history, involving over 3 million people spread across thousands of worlds. Susan's ship, the New Horizon, was packed with families from the mining colonies of the Vega system. Many of them had lived in the colonies for generations. Their children had been born among the stars, never seeing Earth except in pictures. Captain, her first officer reported, we are receiving another transmission from the Vegan Colonial Authority. They are demanding we return the human workers to complete their contracts. Susan smiled grimly. Tell them that slaves do not have contracts. Tell them that free people can choose where to live and work. The evacuation was not without its challenges. Some alien governments tried to prevent humans from leaving, claiming they were essential workers who could not be replaced. Others offered massive bribes or threatened economic sanctions against Earth. A few governments even tried to use force. The Altarian Defense Force had attempted to stop a transport convoy carrying human scientists from their research stations. The convoy was escorted by 3 Earth military ships, including the heavy cruiser Vigilant. The Altarians had 12 ships to the humans' 3. It should have been an easy victory. Instead, the Earth ships disabled the entire Altarian fleet in less than 10 minutes, using weapons technology the aliens had never seen before. Word of the battle spread quickly through military channels. The galaxy began to realize that Earth had been holding back their true capabilities. The humans had advanced military technology that made their own fleets look like children's toys. But the humans were not interested in conquest. They were only interested in getting their people home safely. Back on Earth, President Kevin Harris was coordinating the massive resettlement effort. Millions of people were returning to a world they had never seen or had not visited in decades. Housing had to be built, jobs had to be created. Entire cities had to be expanded to accommodate the influx of population. But the returning humans brought with them something more valuable than anything they had left behind: knowledge. They brought experience from 1,000 different worlds, understanding of alien technologies, and most importantly, they brought a burning desire to prove that humanity could do better on its own. The galaxy was watching too. Initial reports suggested that the human withdrawal was just a negotiating tactic. Surely Earth would return to the negotiating table once they realized how much they needed galactic trade and support. But as the months passed and more human facilities went dark, the truth became undeniable. Humanity was not coming back. They were walking away from 3 centuries of galactic civilization, and they were taking their irreplaceable knowledge and skills with them. The real consequences were just beginning to show. 2 years had passed since the last human ship departed from galactic space, and the consequences were spreading like wildfire across known civilization. What had begun as isolated system failures had grown into a galaxy-wide crisis that no one seemed able to control. on the industrial world of Threno 5. Administrator Keck stood in the control room of the main terraforming facility, staring at warning lights that flashed red across every console. The atmospheric processors that kept the planet habitable were failing one by one, and he had no idea how to fix them. "The oxygen levels in Sector 7 are dropping again," reported his chief technician, a nervous creature with 6 arms who kept checking and rechecking the same readings. "The nitrogen processors in Sectors 3 and 9 are showing critical errors. The carbon scrubbers are running at only 30% efficiency." Kex felt his stomach turn. Threno 5 had been transformed from a dead rock into a garden world. Over the course of 50 years, all thanks to human terraforming technology, the systems were incredibly complex, involving atmospheric chemistry, weather control, and ecosystem management that required constant fine-tuning. Only one human had truly understood how it all worked together. Carl Jackson, the chief maintenance engineer who had overseen the project for 15 years. Carl had written all the manuals, trained all the technicians, and personally calibrated every major system on the planet. When Carl left with the other humans, he had provided basic operating instructions to the alien staff. But those instructions only covered normal operations. They did not explain what to do when multiple systems started failing at the same time. "Sir, we have tried everything in the manual," the technician said. "We have replaced components, recalibrated sensors, and reset all the primary circuits. Nothing is working. The atmospheric balance is becoming unstable." Kex looked out the window at the purple-tinted sky that marked Threno 5 as a successfully terraformed world. Soon, that sky might return to the poisonous brown of its natural state. 20 million people lived on this planet. If the atmospheric processors failed completely, they would all have to be evacuated. But evacuation was becoming impossible. The hyperspace relay network that Rick Davis had shut down was still offline, making communication between star systems extremely difficult. Ships could still travel, but coordinating rescue efforts across multiple worlds was nearly impossible without real-time communication. Similar disasters were unfolding across the galaxy. On the trading hub of New Cygnus, the economic prediction systems that had prevented 3 major recessions were no longer working. Dr. Helen Brooks had designed those systems using economic models that took into account thousands of variables across hundreds of worlds. Without Helen's regular updates and adjustments, the prediction algorithms were becoming less accurate every day. Market fluctuations that the system should have caught early were now causing massive crashes. Entire sectors of the galactic economy were collapsing as traders lost confidence in the financial infrastructure. Director Van of the New Cygnus Trade Commission sat in his office, surrounded by reports of economic disaster. In the past month alone, 17 major trading companies had gone bankrupt. The Altarian shipping conglomerate had lost 40% of its value. The Centauri Manufacturing Consortium was laying off workers by the millions. How did we become so dependent on one species? Van asked his assistant, a question he had been asking himself every day for months. His assistant, a young Zephyrian with bright blue scales, looked up from her data pad. "The humans never told us we were dependent on them, sir. They just solved problems when problems arose. We assumed the solutions were permanent." Van nodded sadly. It was true. Humans had never demanded credit or recognition for their work. They had simply done what needed to be done, quietly and efficiently. Only now that they were gone did anyone realize how much they had been doing. But nowhere were the consequences, more severe than in the medical sector. The Void Plague, a cosmic infection that had nearly been eradicated by human medical science, was returning with a vengeance. The plague was unlike any natural disease. It seemed to feed on biological energy itself, spreading through space on cosmic radiation and infecting any living creature it encountered. Human Dr. Ben Murphy had spent 12 years studying the plague, eventually developing treatments that reduced its mortality rate from 90% to less than 1%. Dr. Murphy's research stations were located throughout the galaxy, monitoring for new outbreaks and developing vaccines for different species. When the humans withdrew, all of those stations went dark. The monitoring network disappeared overnight, and with it, the early warning system that had prevented major epidemics. The first new outbreak occurred on the remote world of Kepler 9. By the time anyone realized what was happening, the plague had already spread to 3 neighboring systems. The local medical authorities tried to implement the treatments that Dr. Murphy had developed, but they discovered that the procedures were far more complex than they had realized. Dr. Zorth, the head of Galactic Disease Control, stood in his laboratory looking at tissue samples from plague victims. The samples showed cellular damage unlike anything in his medical textbooks. The plague was not just killing cells, it was somehow draining the life energy from them, leaving behind empty husks that should not have been able to exist. "Have we made any progress on reproducing the Murphy treatment protocols?" he asked his research team. Dr. Vex, his chief researcher, looked up from her microscope with frustration in her multiple eyes. "We have followed every step in the procedures that Dr. Murphy left behind, but something is missing. The treatments are not working. The mortality rate is climbing towards 70%. Dr. Zorth felt a chill run through his body. 70% mortality meant that the plague was almost as deadly as it had been before human intervention. If it continued to spread, it could kill billions of people across dozens of worlds. "What are we missing?" he asked. "I believe the problem is in the quantum resonance calibration," Dr. Vex replied. Dr. Murphy's notes reference specific frequency adjustments that must be made for each patient based on their biological energy patterns. But we do not understand how to measure those patterns, much less adjust for them. The quantum aspects of the Murphy treatment had always been the most mysterious part. Dr. Murphy had claimed that the plague existed partially outside normal space-time, which was why traditional treatments were ineffective. His cure worked by adjusting the quantum frequency of the patient's cells to make them incompatible with the plague organism. But quantum medicine was a field that humans had developed almost entirely on their own. Other species had made attempts to understand it, but they lacked the intuitive grasp of quantum mechanics that seemed to come naturally to human scientists. Meanwhile, the political situation was becoming just as chaotic as the technical problems. Without human mediators, old conflicts that had been dormant for decades were flaring up again. The Canthari and Velox empires had resumed their ancient blood feud, launching raids against each other's border worlds. The conflict had been frozen for 40 years thanks to a peace treaty negotiated by human diplomat Robert Chen. But Robert was gone now, and no one else understood the complex web of compromises and agreements that had made the peace possible. General Thak of the Canthari war fleet stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching as Velox colonies burned on the view screen below. The attack had been perfectly executed, using tactics that his human military advisors had taught him years ago. But General Thak felt no satisfaction in the victory. The Velox would retaliate, probably against Canthari civilian targets. The cycle of violence would continue until both empires exhausted themselves in pointless warfare. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we are receiving a transmission from the Velox home fleet. They are demanding immediate withdrawal from their territory. Tell them we will withdraw when they return the Canthari worlds they conquered 3 decades ago," General Thak replied, knowing that the Velox would never agree to such terms. This was exactly the kind of situation that human negotiators had been trained to handle. They would have found a compromise that allowed both sides to claim victory while actually achieving peace. But there were no human negotiators anymore. The galactic government was paralyzed. The Galactic Council tried to hold emergency sessions to address the growing crises, but without the hyperspace communication network, it took weeks just to get representatives from different sectors to the meeting location. Counselor Prime Vex, who had been so confident when he demanded human scientists as slaves, now found himself struggling to maintain order in a galaxy that was falling apart. Every day brought new reports of system failures, economic collapses, and military conflicts. "How long until we can restore the communication network?" he asked his technical advisors during one particularly desperate council session. Chief Engineer Roth, a spider-like creature with 8 legs and cybernetic implants, shook his head sadly. "We have examined the human relay stations, Prime Counselor. The technology is far more advanced than we realized. The quantum field generators use principles that we do not understand. 3 years had passed since humanity's withdrawal, and the galaxy's desperation had reached a breaking point. The death toll from various crises had climbed into the hundreds of billions. Entire species were facing extinction, and the few remaining, functional governments were demanding action. Counselor Prime Vex stood in the command center of the massive warship Dominion's Pride, flagship of the largest military fleet ever assembled in galactic history. Around him, representatives from 47 different species prepared for what they hoped would be the final solution to the human problem. "Status report," Vex commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had nothing left to lose. Admiral Korath, a battle-scarred veteran from the Rigel campaign, stepped forward. "We have assembled 1,200 ships from 31 different fleets, Prime Counselor. Our combined firepower exceeds anything the galaxy has ever seen. The human defensive perimeter cannot possibly withstand our assault." Vex nodded, though he felt less confident than he tried to appear. Intelligence reports about human space had been disturbing. Long-range scouts who ventured too close to the Sol system reported strange energy readings and defensive installations that defied conventional understanding. Several scouting ships had simply disappeared without sending any distress signals. But the galaxy was dying. The Void Plague had now infected 17 star systems, killing billions. The economic collapse had left entire sectors in chaos. The terraforming failures had made dozens of worlds uninhabitable. Something had to be done, even if it meant war with humanity. "Remember," Vex addressed the assembled fleet commanders, "we are not here to destroy Earth. We are here to force them to resume their obligations to galactic civilization. Once they understand the seriousness of our position, they will surely return to help." General Thak of the Kanthari fleet looked skeptical. "And if they refuse, Prime Counselor? What if they choose to fight?" Vex's expression hardened. "Then we will remind them that they are one species against thousands. They cannot stand against the combined might of the galaxy." The fleet began its journey toward human space, a massive armada that stretched across millions of kilometers. Ships of every design and origin traveled together. Sleek Altarian cruisers, massive Zephyrian battleships, swarms of Velox fighters, and dozens of other vessel types representing the military might of galactic civilization. It took them 3 weeks to reach the edge of human space, and what they found there was not what anyone had expected. The Sol system was surrounded by a defensive perimeter unlike anything in galactic military doctrine. Massive space stations hung in the void like metal moons, their surfaces covered with weapon arrays that seemed to bend light around them. Energy fields connected the stations in complex patterns that created barriers across entire sectors of space, but most disturbing were the ships. Human vessels moved through the defensive grid with fluid grace, their hulls seeming to shift and change as they traveled. Some appeared to phase in and out of normal space, becoming translucent before solidifying again. Others moved in ways that violated basic laws of physics, changing direction without slowing down or accelerating in multiple directions simultaneously. Fleet Admiral Tony Martinez stood on the command deck of the Earth Defense Station Fortress Luna, watching the approaching alien armada through sensors that could detect individual molecules at interplanetary distances. Around him, human officers monitored displays showing weapon systems that the galaxy had never imagined. 1,200 ships, reported Captain Nancy White, his tactical officer. "Mixed fleet composition. They are maintaining standard battle formation, approaching at 0.7 light speed." Tony smiled grimly. "They still think this is going to be a conventional space battle. Do they have any idea what they are facing?" Commander Bill Davis, the station's chief engineer, looked up from his control panel. "Our intelligence suggests they believe we are using advanced versions of known technology, Admiral. They have no concept of dimensional warfare or quantum field manipulation." Tony nodded. For 3 centuries, humanity had shared only the most basic versions of their technology with the galaxy. They had provided solutions to problems using methods that other species could understand and replicate, but humanity's true technological capabilities had always remained hidden, kept secret as a final defense against exactly this kind of situation. The approaching fleet slowed as it reached the outer edge of the human defensive perimeter. Warning. Beacons began broadcasting in dozens of languages, all carrying the same message. You are entering human space. Turn back immediately. This is your only warning. Counselor Prime Vex stood on the bridge of Dominion's Pride, staring at the human defensive installations with growing unease. The stations were clearly more advanced than anything in the galactic database, but surely they could not stand against 1,200 ships. Send the message, he ordered his communications officer. The transmission was broadcast on all frequencies, designed to reach every human installation in the system. Vex's image appeared on screens throughout human space, his voice carrying the authority of the Galactic Council. People of Earth, I am Counselor Prime Vex, speaking on behalf of all civilized species in the galaxy. Your withdrawal from galactic civilization has caused untold suffering across thousands of worlds. Billions of people have died because of your abandonment of your responsibilities. We demand that you immediately resume your obligations to galactic society. The transmission continued for several minutes, outlining the various crises that had befallen the galaxy and demanding that human scientists, doctors, and engineers return to their former roles. It concluded with a barely veiled threat. If you refuse to cooperate, we will be forced to take action to protect the innocent lives that depend on your assistance. The response came from Admiral Martinez himself, his image appearing on the main screen of every ship in the alien fleet. Tony looked older than his 55 years, his hair gray and his face lined with the weight of command. But his eyes were sharp and determined. Counselor Vex, 3 years ago you voted to enslave our people. You treated our contributions as your property and our sacrifices as your entitlement. We offered you partnership, and you chose exploitation. We offered you cooperation, and you chose domination. Tony paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. You are not welcome in human space. You have 1 hour to withdraw beyond the perimeter. Any ship that remains after that time will be considered hostile and dealt with accordingly. Vex felt his anger rising. You cannot threaten the combined fleets of the galaxy. You are one species against thousands. We have 1,200 ships. Tony's expression did not change. Numbers are not everything, Counselor. You should have learned that by now. The transmission ended, leaving the alien fleet in tense silence. Many of the fleet commanders were experienced veterans who had fought in dozens of battles. They recognized something in Admiral Martinez's voice that made them nervous. Complete confidence. Sir, Admiral Korth said quietly, perhaps we should consider the possibility that the humans have military capabilities we do not understand. Vex shook his head firmly. Impossible. We have studied human technology for 3 centuries. They are advanced, but not beyond our ability to comprehend. Prepare for battle. The hour passed slowly. Human ships continued to move through their defensive grid, seemingly unaware of the massive fleet poised to attack them. Some alien commanders reported that their sensors could not maintain consistent locks on the human vessels, as if they were somehow existing in multiple locations at once. When the deadline expired, Vex gave the order to attack. The alien fleet surged forward, 1,200 ships launching missiles, energy beams, and plasma charges at the human defensive positions. The volume of fire was unprecedented in galactic military history, enough to destroy entire planets. But something impossible happened. The human defensive grid did not try to block or deflect the incoming fire. Instead, the attacks simply passed. Through the human installations as if they were not there, missiles flew harmlessly through solid metal. Energy beams struck nothing but empty space. Plasma charges dissipated without causing any damage. Before the alien commanders could process what they had witnessed, the human response began. The human ship seemed to flicker out of existence, vanishing from sensors and visual observation. Then they reappeared inside the alien formation, having somehow bypassed all defensive screens and armor. Human weapons fired energy beams that passed through shields as if they did not exist, striking hulls with surgical precision. Within minutes, hundreds of alien ships found their engines disabled, their weapons offline, and their life support systems failing. But the humans were not trying to destroy the fleet. They were demonstrating complete technological superiority, while minimizing casualties. Ships that had taken decades to build were disabled by single precise shots. Defensive systems that had protected fleets for centuries were bypassed as if they were children's toys. The most advanced military technology in the galaxy was rendered useless against weapons that seemed to operate by entirely different physical laws. Admiral Korath watched in horror as his flagship's entire weapons array was destroyed by a beam that his sensors could not even detect. 10 years had passed since the failed galactic invasion of human space, and the contrast between the two civilizations could not have been more stark. While the galaxy continued its slow descent into chaos, humanity had built something entirely new among the stars. Director Sarah Kim stood on the observation deck of Olympus Station, humanity's newest deep space exploration hub, watching construction crews put the finishing touches on the orbital city. The station was massive, larger than any structure the old galaxy had ever built, but it was not the size that made it remarkable. It was the technology. The station existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously, allowing it to house millions of people in a space that appeared to be only a few kilometers across. Gardens filled with earth plants grew in impossible geometries, their roots extending through folded space to draw nutrients from multiple soil sources. The central spire reached into hyperspace itself, serving as an anchor for humanity's new, faster-than-light communication network. Status report on the exploration fleet, Sarah requested from her assistant, a young woman named Lucy Chen who had been born in the Outer Rim colonies. All 47 ships have checked in, Director. Captain Martinez's team has made contact with 3 new species this month alone. The Cavaxi seem particularly interested in trade agreements, and the Solari have requested technical assistance with their dying star. Sarah smiled. The new species that humanity had discovered beyond the galactic rim were nothing like the old galactic powers. They approached humanity with respect, curiosity, and genuine interest in mutual cooperation. When they asked for help, they offered fair exchange in return. When humans shared technology, the new species contributed their own knowledge to improve the designs. It was everything that galactic civilization should have been, but never was. Engineer Mike Torres worked in the construction bay, where the next generation of human starships were being built. These vessels bore no resemblance to the crude metal boxes that the galaxy still used for space travel. Human ships were grown rather than built, their hulls composed of living metal that could repair itself and adapt to different environments. How is the test of the quantum drives coming along? Mike asked his team leader, Dr. Jennifer Stone. Beyond our best projections, Jennifer replied, her eyes bright with excitement. The new ships can travel the distance from Earth to the galactic core in just 3 days. The old galaxy would need 6 months to make the same journey, assuming their hyperspace lanes were still functioning. Mike nodded. Human technology had advanced by centuries in just 10 years, freed from the constant need to rescue galactic civilization from its own problems. Human scientists could focus on pure research instead of crisis management. Human engineers could design for exploration and growth instead of damage control. The results spoke for themselves. Humanity had established over 200 colonies in previously unexplored regions of space. They had made peaceful contact with dozens of new species. They had solved scientific problems that had puzzled researchers for generations. Meanwhile, the old galaxy was dying. Reports reached humanity through various channels: refugee ships that escaped the chaos, automated probes that still functioned in abandoned systems, and occasionally desperate messages from alien governments begging for help. The Void Plague had now infected 37 star systems. Without Dr. Ben Murphy's treatment protocols, the mortality rate had climbed to 85%. Entire species were going extinct, their homeworlds transformed into plague-ridden graveyards. The economic collapse had wiped out galactic trade almost entirely. Without human economic models and financial systems, markets had become completely unpredictable. Currency had lost all meaning in many sectors, forcing civilizations to return to primitive barter systems. The terraforming failures had made dozens of worlds uninhabitable. Atmospheric processors broke down faster than they could be repaired, forcing mass evacuations that strained the remaining functional worlds beyond their capacity. Most tragically, The wars had resumed with a vengeance. Without human mediators to resolve conflicts, old hatreds had exploded into violence that consumed entire sectors. The Canthari-Velix War had spread to include 7 other species. The Zephyrian Empire had collapsed into civil war. Smaller species found themselves conquered or exterminated by their more powerful neighbors. Dr. Rachel Stone led humanity's first contact protocols for the new species they encountered in the Outer Rim. Her team had developed procedures based on the lessons learned from 3 centuries of galactic interaction. The new approach emphasized mutual respect, fair exchange, and genuine partnership. The Andrali delegation has agreed to the Cultural Exchange Program, Rachel reported to the First Contact Council. They want to send 50 of their students to study at our academies, and they are offering to teach us their crystal growing techniques in return. Council leader Frank White nodded approvingly. The Andrali were a peaceful species that had developed remarkable skill in growing crystals that could store vast amounts of information. Their knowledge would complement human quantum computing research perfectly. What about the Mallory situation? Frank asked. Rachel's expression became more serious. They are still requesting military assistance against the Keth raiders. The Keith have been attacking Malari colonies for the past year, stealing resources and enslaving populations. This was the kind of situation that humanity had dealt with hundreds of times in the old galaxy. A peaceful species being attacked by aggressive neighbors unable to defend themselves, desperately needing outside intervention. But this time, humanity approached the problem differently. We have offered the Malari defensive technology and training, Rachel explained. Our engineers are teaching them to build shield generators and defensive platforms. Our military advisors are training their security forces in modern tactics. In 6 months, they will be able to defend themselves effectively. Frank smiled. And the Keth response? 3 Keth raiding fleets have already been destroyed by Malari defenses. The Keth leadership has requested negotiations. They seem to have realized that enslaving species protected by human technology is not profitable. This was the human way now, teaching others to solve their own problems instead of solving the problems for them. It took longer and required more patience, but it created lasting solutions instead of temporary fixes. The contrast with the old galaxy was striking. When humanity had been part of galactic civilization, alien species had become completely dependent on human assistance. They never learned to solve problems themselves because humans were always there to provide answers. Now, the new species in the Outer Rim were becoming stronger and more capable with each passing year. They learned from human knowledge and contributed their own discoveries. They built defensive alliances based on mutual aid rather than dependence. Admiral Grace Turner commanded the human exploration fleet from her flagship, the Endeavour. The ship was a marvel of human engineering, capable of traveling between dimensions and existing in multiple locations simultaneously. Its mission was to map the unexplored regions beyond the galactic rim and make contact with new civilizations. Admiral, her communications officer reported, "We are receiving another transmission from the Galactic Council. This one is marked as urgent priority." Grace sighed. The old galaxy had been sending increasingly desperate messages for years, begging humanity to return and help with various crises. The messages had evolved from demands to bribes to threats, and finally to pure desperation. "What are they offering this time?" Grace asked. "Complete control of the galaxy, Admiral. They are offering to make Earth the ruling power over all known space. They promise to follow human leadership in all matters, and to provide any resources humanity requests." Grace looked out at the stars ahead of them, regions of space that no galactic ship had ever explored. Out there were wonders waiting to be discovered, new species to befriend, new knowledge to be gained. Behind them was a dying galaxy that had rejected humanity's friendship and now wanted to surrender their independence in exchange for salvation. "Send the standard response," Grace ordered. The communications officer nodded and transmitted the message that had become humanity's official position. Earth remembers its friends. The galaxy was not one of them. The transmission also included a final offer that humanity had been making for years. Any species that wishes to leave galactic space and join humanity in building a new civilization based on mutual respect and cooperation is welcome to do so. We judge species by their actions, not their past associations. A few species had taken humanity up on this offer. The Altarians, who had been among the few to support human rights in the original vote, had moved their entire civilization to human space. Several smaller species had followed, finding new homes in the outer rim colonies. But the major galactic powers remained behind, too proud to admit their mistakes and too weak to survive without help. As the Endeavour continued its journey into unexplored space, Grace received a report that made her smile. The latest deep space probe had detected signs of a vast civilization in the Andromeda galaxy, completely separate from the Milky Way's political structure.